2008, Cleveland, Ohio. A factory worker loses his job when the plant shuts down. The bank forecloses on his house. The government steps in, not to save him, but to bail out the financial institutions that caused the crash. 2020, same city. A pandemic hits. Millions lose their jobs again. Healthcare disappears the moment employment does. Billionaires add hundreds of billions to their net worth in a single year. 2023, rent is up, groceries are up, student debt is back, wages barely moved. And every election cycle we're told the same thing: just give the market more time. But what if the problem isn't bad management? What if the problem is the system itself? Today, we're going to talk about socialism, what it actually is, why Americans fear it, why it keeps coming back into the conversation, and why some argue that only socialism can save us now. This isn't a slogan, it's a serious question. Because if capitalism is working, why does it feel like it's failing so many people? First, what is socialism? Let's clear the fog. Socialism is an economic system where the major means of production, factories, energy, large corporations, infrastructure, are owned collectively rather than privately. That doesn't mean the government owns your toothbrush. It means that the big, society-shaping economic assets aren't controlled by a small group of shareholders seeking profit. At its core, socialism argues that production should serve human needs, not maximize profit. Workers should have democratic control over their workplaces. Essential goods like healthcare, housing, and education should be guaranteed. Wealth and power should not concentrate endlessly at the top. There are different versions. Democratic socialism focuses on elections, public ownership of key sectors, and strong welfare states. State socialism involves heavy centralized planning. Market socialism allows markets but shifts ownership to workers. China's model combines state control of key industries with market mechanisms. Socialism isn't one monolithic thing, but the unifying principle is simple. Economic power should be democratic. Why Americans fear socialism? Let's be honest. In the United States, socialism has a branding problem. When many Americans hear the word, they think Soviet gulags, breadlines, Venezuela's collapse, government inefficiency, loss of freedom. Those concerns are not imaginary. Authoritarian regimes have existed under the banner of socialism. Economic mismanagement has happened. Central planning has failed in certain historical contexts. But here's the critical question. Were those failures caused by the idea of collective ownership itself, or by corruption, authoritarian power structures, geopolitical pressure, and economic isolation? Because if we're going to judge socialism by its worst examples, we should judge capitalism by its worst examples too. Colonial exploitation, child labor, the Great Depression, 2008 financial collapse, environmental destruction. Every system has failure modes. So instead of slogans, let's talk structure. The structural problem with capitalism. Capitalism is built on three pillars: private ownership, profit maximization, and market competition. For centuries, capitalism solved real problems. It replaced feudalism. It unleashed industrial growth. It raised productivity dramatically. It lifted millions out of poverty. But capitalism also contains a built-in logic. Companies must grow, profits must increase, costs must decrease, shareholders must be rewarded. And in practice, that means wages are a cost, healthcare is a cost, environmental protection is a cost. Long-term sustainability is secondary to quarterly earnings. This logic doesn't make CEOs evil, it makes them rational within the system. Now look at modern America. Healthcare is tied to employment because it's cheaper for corporations. Housing is treated as an investment asset, not a human necessity. Student debt generates profit for lenders. Climate policy is stalled because fossil fuel industries remain profitable. The system is not broken accidentally, it is functioning as designed. And that design prioritizes capital accumulation. The inequality problem. In 1980, CEO pay in the US was about 30 times the average worker's salary. Today, it's over 300 times. The top 1% owns more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. Is that because the top 1% work 300 times harder? Or is it because ownership compounds? Under capitalism, labor earns wages. Capital earns returns. If you own assets, your wealth grows automatically. If you don't, you trade time for survival. This is not a moral judgment, it's arithmetic. Over time, capital concentrates. Socialism argues that this concentration of ownership is incompatible with democracy, because when economic power concentrates, political power follows. And in the US, corporate lobbying, campaign financing, and regulatory capture are proof of that. The climate problem. Capitalism requires growth, endless growth, but we live on a finite planet. If every corporation must grow every year, extraction must grow every year. Energy consumption must grow every year. That logic directly collides with ecological limits. Yes, green capitalism exists. Yes, renewable energy investment is happening. But fossil fuels remain profitable. And as long as they remain profitable, they will be extracted. Markets don't solve externalities naturally. They respond to price signals, and environmental damage is often priced at zero until it's catastrophic. A system designed for profit is not designed for planetary survival. Socialism argues that production should be planned around sustainability and human well-being, not return on investment. What about innovation? One of the strongest capitalist arguments is this: capitalism drives innovation, socialism kills it. There's truth here. Profit motivates risk-taking. But let's examine reality. The internet? Publicly funded research. GPS? US government project. Touchscreen technology? Public research grants. mRNA vaccines? Massive public investment. The private sector often commercializes innovation, but the foundational breakthroughs are frequently publicly funded. Innovation does not require billionaire shareholders. It requires research, incentives, and talent. A socialist system could still reward innovation, but redirect profits back into society rather than concentrating them into a few hands. What about China? China complicates the conversation. Since 1980, China has lifted over 800 million people out of extreme poverty. That is the largest poverty reduction in human history. It did so through state-directed industrial planning, massive infrastructure investment, strategic control of finance, and long-term economic coordination. China is not a pure free market. Key industries are state-controlled. Banking is heavily regulated. Planning plays a central role. At the same time, China faces serious criticisms: limited political freedoms, human rights concerns, authoritarian governance. The takeaway is not China is perfect. The takeaway is that coordinated planning at national scale can drive rapid development. Capitalism claims markets are the only path to prosperity. China proves that state direction can achieve results too. Countering the big capitalist argument. Let's address them directly. Socialism always leads to dictatorship. Authoritarianism is a political problem, not an inevitable economic outcome. Scandinavian countries combine strong social systems with robust democracy. Worker co-ops operate democratically inside capitalist economies. Government is inefficient. Medicare's administrative overhead is significantly lower than private insurance. Public systems can be inefficient, but so can private monopolies. Efficiency depends on design, not ideology. Look at Venezuela. Venezuela's economy was overwhelmingly dependent on oil exports. Price collapse, plus sanctions, plus mismanagement created crisis. One example does not define an entire theory. Capitalism reduces poverty globally. Yes, global poverty has declined, largely due to industrialization and state-led development in countries like China. But inequality, instability, and environmental destruction have also increased. Why only socialism? Here's the real argument. We are facing structural crises: climate instability, automation displacing labor, healthcare affordability, housing crises, wealth concentration, political capture by corporations. These are not isolated failures, they are systemic outcomes. A system built on profit maximization struggles to solve problems that are unprofitable to solve. Universal healthcare? Profits shrink. Affordable housing? Real estate returns shrink. Degrowth for climate? GDP shrinks. Capitalism resists solutions that threaten accumulation. Socialism proposes a structural shift from profit to need, from private ownership to collective ownership, from shareholder control to democratic control. That is not a minor reform, it's a redesign. And some argue that only a redesign can solve structural breakdown. Is it risky? Transforming an economic system is inherently risky. There are transition costs, there are governance challenges, there are historical lessons to learn from. But maintaining a system that is accelerating inequality and ecological collapse is also risky. The question isn't, is socialism risky? The question is the current trajectory safer? The final question. Maybe the radical idea isn't socialism. Maybe the radical idea is believing that a system built for endless accumulation can solve climate change, inequality, and democratic decay without fundamentally changing itself. Socialism is not magic. It is not perfect. It has failed before, but so has capitalism. The debate isn't about ideology, it's about structure. If the rules of the game produce these outcomes, maybe we need new rules. So when someone asks how only socialism can save us now, the real question underneath is this: can democracy survive without democratizing the economy? Because if economic power remains concentrated, political power will follow, and that might be the most urgent problem of all.